Hello everybody, welcome to the joy of Dwarven painting. I am Hamster, here to guide you through the paint steps of the Dreadhollow Forest and the Bleakmyre Swamp, designed by Erin. So we're gonna start with shallow water seaweed green, and we're gonna paint all of the plants and moss areas with this color. You want an opaque base coat here, so it might take 1 or 2 layers in a couple spots, but just wait for it to dry between layers and make sure it's covers completely. Also, in the description of this video, there's a link to a PDF guide as well that you can follow along at your own pace. I'm using the Pokorny size 3 paintbrush, just something sort of in a middle ground where you can precisely go around areas that you don't want to be green, but you can still get a nice opaque layer. Now, the Pokorny paints are pretty thin, so you don't need to be too afraid of going too thick. I would say err on the side of thicker in this case because it shouldn't obscure any detail, and you just want to get that coverage right off the bat. Of course, if you notice it drying a little thick, you may have found that sweet spot where it is a little too much, but it's not going to be too dangerous in this case. I am going to try a bigger brush. If you have something in your collection that is between the Pokorny size 3 and our 12 dry brush here, that might work better, but I'm going to get a little crazy and try to use the big one. I'm not too worried about being neat here, but we want to get to the cool steps, so we'll use a big brush and not be too precise yet, so we can just get to the finer steps. And in fact, until you get a little further on the piece, sometimes it's a little hard to see some of the details, so sometimes I'll go a little overboard on the green, because if you miss a spot down the road, it will just look like more moss. Now, the trick is a lot of times with really any acrylic, it looks a little brighter when it's wet still, and it'll darken down just a touch. But in general, I do love the shallow green. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do a complete layer, but I am just gonna make sure I'm peeking around and finding any places that I might have missed.
When you first worked here, you thought that you had to individually paint every piece that was going on to customers?
I thought that what we were painting is what we sent to the customers. And then the next week, Nate was like, hey, these don't really fit in this gap. Can you take them on the belt sander and shave off a couple millimeters? I was like, are people gonna be happy buying that? Now again, you want this step to dry before you move on. You can take a hair dryer, or here we have a heat gun that we also use for heating our monster clay when sculpting, but anything like that will increase the dry time and allow you to move on a little faster. So you can see my base coat isn't entirely opaque. You can do as many layers as you'd like. I tend to like a little bit of variance on the base coat. And of course, when we're painting Dwarven Forge, we're often painting multiple pieces, so you don't want to get too bogged down by one individual piece. So I think this is good. Step 2, we'll do a dry brush of moss green over all the areas that we just painted with our other green, and allow this to dry, of course, before you move on to the next step. And if you're new to dry brushing, you just want to get your wet paint on the brush and wipe most of it off on a paper towel so that there's very little paint left on the brush. And then you're going to do a light feather dusting motion so that the texture, the upper texture, grabs the paint, and there's not so much that it will kind of seep into the details. And again, Pokorny paint is on the thin side, so sometimes it can help for you to lay out the paint a little early, maybe in the first step, so that it dries on your palette or surface a little bit, so it's a little thicker and heavier to get the effect that we want on the dry brush. And again, this is a step that you do not need to be precise. Later steps will cover all this up, so I tend to just basically dry brush the whole piece. I'm kind of aiming for the spots that we've just painted green, but if I get it all over, I'd rather do that than miss an important spot. And if you are using the moss green right out of the bottle, just like the last step, it may just take an extra pass. Now, if you get confident in your dry brushing technique, you can leave a little extra wet paint on the brush, and you gotta be very light with your brush pressure, and you can get a little more paint to come off if you use the side of the brush very lightly. Now, this can cause it to streak, so you'll have to get used to it, but I think it's worth trying for a little more of an advanced technique. Yeah, actually for dry brushing, I buy makeup brushes from like Walgreens. They're really cheap. And yeah, kind of have that like round shape. And they're soft bristles, so it kind of stops some of that chalky streaking effect sometimes. So again, let this step dry. You can do this to your taste as much as you'd like if you want it to be brighter or less so. I would say this is maybe a middle ground, but just like the first step, I love a little variance. Step 3, we're moving on to the rocks and base coating all of them in base gray. And with this step, you also don't need to be precise. You do want to be neat and stay away from the green areas, but there are other steps that give them the cool factor. So this one we kind of just want to get through and lay a foundation. Yeah, this rock scheme is also used in Erin Mountains. A lot of the grassy greens and the wood colors are used in other parts of Wildlands as well. So I finished this step. There may be some that I've missed. I think I've painted a couple leaves here and there gray. You can go back and fix these if you'd like, but remember this is going to be among a build of many pieces, so generally I just leave it how it is. Your factory pieces will be painted pretty precisely in that respect, but if you're painting them yourself, I think it's safe to just move on and be happy with some leaves being gray once in a while. So step 4, we're going to take earthstone mixed with a little bit of olive dry brush for the next step on the rocks and give them a good solid dry brush. You want this to be pretty heavy because there'll be one more dry brush and you don't want it to completely vanish. So don't be afraid to go a little heavier on this one. You can also use this mixture to fill in some of the puddles and pools in the earth and mud. And for this dry brush, I sometimes even leave the paint a little wet so you can get some larger patches here and there because, again, we're going to dry brush it a second time. I even do less of a feather duster motion that we did before and do more of a dabbing or stippling in a few places. But like most dry brushing, you do kind of want to focus on the edges of the details and let it catch your paint. And if you'd like, you can get a little painterly here and use your imagination a little. There's some flatter spots that could be some dirt or earth that you can hit with this color, or you can leave them green. So kind of use your own sense here for how you like it to look. And then you can make each floor different if you like. Step 5, we're going with a Dwarven Forge Classic Cavern Dry Brush. We use this color a lot for highlights because it's nice and bright, but still that neutral earth sort of tone that can highlight a lot of different colors. So we're going to do one final dry brush that's a little lighter on all of our rocks. You can also hit the sides of your pieces with this as well. So for this step, use the hard edges of the stones and rocks to your advantage. Try using the side of the brush to really catch those, because that's what's going to make it pop from the table when we finally put it down at build distance. Step 6, we're moving on to trees. You're going to start with Pokorny-based wood and hit all the trunks and branches and sticks and twigs with a nice dry brush. And sometimes with the finer sticks, you can just give it a solid base coat. For all the roots and branches spidering out around this thing, I do tend to use a round brush, detail brush, and less of a dry brush, just again using the side to try to hit the upper details and leave some shadow. But if you're sloppy like me, there's all sorts of colors all over these branches, so it's easier to just take a detail brush and cover up the old colors. And remember, the paint will appear a little bit brighter when it's wet, so if you're dry brushing or layering nearby a spot that you previously painted, it might look a little out of place, but just let it dry and it should look just great. Step 7, we're doing our final step on the trees and sticks with Pokorny Stucco. You can mix a little bit of your base wood in as well if you'd like. And we'll just do a slight dry brush to highlight all of the wood grain and twigs. And sometimes I don't even do a true dry brush. I'll just take the edge of a round brush so we can be a little more precise. But I still remove the excess paint from the brush. Step 8, we're going to detail specifically the Dreadhollow Forest pieces. Each biome kind of has its own detail color, so for all the berries and any extra little things that you want to pick out, we're going to use Pokorny Regal Red. And that's it for Dreadhollow Forest. We're going to do a couple final steps on the swamp banks. So for your swamp banks, you're going to do a dry brush of Pokorny Moss Green and go a little heavier on some of the slimier parts. There's some pockets of algae along the bank that you can really muck up with the moss green. Step 10, the final step for our swamps, we're going to hit all the critters and odd plants and details with a purple mix using Pokorny's Regal Red and Basalt Blue with a touch of white to brighten it up. And that's it for Dreadhollow Forest and Bleakmyre Swamp. I encourage you to switch up which details you paint certain ways, which ones you don't. A lot of my branches are green, my leaves are brown. Nature has a lot of colors and variants, so I encourage you to switch it up as you go, and maybe throw in some different paints from your Pokorny collection. We stream Hamster's Hobby Hang every Thursday on Twitch at Dwarven Forge Live, 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm happy to answer any and all painting questions you have, or take me on our Discord as well, and our family of Dwarven Forge fans can answer anything that you may be wondering about painting your forest and swamp there as well. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.